My parents used to call me their disappointment daughter. They'd joke about it when people were around. But when it was just us, their words cut sharper than any blade. But the day my AgTech startup sold for $9.5 million, their smiles finally cracked, because that success uncovered a betrayal they never thought I would survive. Stay with me for a moment while I tell you how everything really happened. And if my journey means something to you, show a little love by supporting the channel and sharing this story with someone who needs it. My name is Alara Montwell. I grew up in a house where silence was safer than honesty. My parents, Hadley and Russ, were the kind of people who treated achievement like oxygen. They couldn't breathe without bragging about something. Sadly, none of that pride was ever for me. It was always for my younger brother, Soren. He was the pride of the family, the golden child who could do no wrong. I was the quiet one, the one who loved soil science and spent hours reading about crops, water balance, and how tiny changes underground could change entire harvests. To me, it was fascinating. To my parents, it was a joke. They called it a hobby for people who fail at real careers. Every time they laughed, a piece of me folded inward, but I kept studying anyway. One night, walking past their bedroom, I heard them say I would never bring honor to the Montwell name. I stood frozen. It wasn't new, but hearing them say it so plainly made something in me break. A few weeks later, the real betrayal came. I found out they'd drained my entire college fund, money saved for me since childhood, and used it to send Soren to some private business program. No apology, no explanation, just a quiet expectation that I would accept it. I didn't. I packed 2 duffel bags, walked out, and promised myself that I would never let anyone, especially them, decide my worth again. Life outside wasn't easy. I worked nights at a grocery store, cleaned offices on weekends, and picked up part-time shifts at a cafe. In between those hours, I sketched designs for soil sensor technology on scrap paper, napkins, anything I could find. My parents told relatives I had run off because she couldn't handle responsibility. It stung, but I kept going. Everything changed when I met Brenton Kale, a retired agricultural engineer with gentle eyes and a mind full of knowledge. He looked at my sketches and saw potential immediately. For the first time in my life, an adult believed in me. With his guidance, I refined my ideas. I saved every spare dollar. And finally, with shaking hands and a heart full of stubborn hope, I filed paperwork for my own startup, Root Signal Systems. I told myself I would build something real, something strong, and I would do it without a single Montwell dollar. Alara's tiny studio apartment was barely big enough for a bed, a small table, and the scattered pieces of her first soil sensor prototype. Every night after her shift, she came home exhausted, but she still forced herself to keep testing, adjusting wires, tightening screws, and recording data until her eyes burned. It wasn't much, but it was hers, and she believed in it more than anything her family ever praised. One evening, the doorbell rang, and standing there was Vera Thatch, the polished, always perfect classmate she hadn't seen since college. Vera smiled like they'd been best friends. "I heard you were working on something exciting," she said, stepping inside without being invited. Her voice sounded sweet, but her eyes scanned the cluttered space like she was judging everything. She said she wanted to support Alara's work, but something about her smile felt slippery, like she had another intention hiding underneath. A few days later, Alara's parents showed up. They didn't bring food or encouragement, just criticism. Hadley wrinkled her nose at the wires and tools scattered everywhere. Russ folded his arms and asked, "Is this what you left home for?" "A scrapyard invention project." Their voices echoed in the small room, heavy and cold. They didn't see the hours she poured into it. They didn't want to. "You're embarrassing the Montwell legacy," Hadley snapped before walking out like she couldn't stand the sight of her own daughter. When the door closed behind them, Alara felt something inside her collapse. She sat on the floor, hands shaking, wondering if they were right. Maybe she was a failure, trying to pretend she wasn't. She almost quit that night, almost packed everything away. But then Brenton called. His voice was calm, steady. "Don't let them break you," he said. "Your idea has value. Keep going." And she did, even though her chest still felt heavy. The next morning, her phone buzzed with a message from Soren. "Quit before you humiliate the family further." She stared at the screen for a long time. It hurt, but it also lit a fire in her. Instead of quitting, she sent 5 emails to local farmers asking if anyone would be willing to test her prototype. Only one replied, a small blueberry farm on the edge of town, struggling to survive. They didn't have money to gamble, but they were desperate enough to try anything. Alara drove there with her prototype in a cardboard box and installed it herself. The farmers watched her with cautious eyes, unsure if this quiet young woman could really help them. Weeks passed. Alara visited the farm every few days, gathering data, adjusting settings, and checking soil readings. Then something amazing happened. The plants started responding. The berries grew fuller, healthier. Yield increased. The farmer shook her hand with tears in his eyes. Word began to spread, not loudly, but quietly, farmer to farmer, field to field. And right when things were finally looking up, Vera reappeared with a bright smile. "Let's collaborate," she said smoothly. But her timing felt too perfect and far too calculated. Brenton watched Vera walk away from the workshop one afternoon, and the look on his face told Alara everything. He didn't trust her. When they were alone, he wiped his hands on a cloth and said quietly, "Be careful with outsiders, Alara. Not everyone smiles with honest intentions." His voice was calm, but the warning sat heavy in the air. Alara nodded. She already felt something off about Vera's sudden interest, but hearing it from Brenton made her pay even closer attention. She didn't have time to dwell on it, though. She was preparing for one of the biggest steps of her life, a formal pitch for a regional AgTech grant. If she won, it would give Root Signal Systems the boost it desperately needed. She spent late nights rewriting slides, practicing her line delivery, and testing her prototypes. The pressure was huge, but she felt hopeful for the first time in a long while. Then, out of nowhere, her parents arrived at her workplace. They walked into the small workshop with bright, fake smiles, complimenting her dedication, and pretending they finally cared. But their eyes weren't on her. They were on the equipment, the documents, the prototypes lined neatly on the shelves. They asked too many questions, took too many mental notes, and left with that familiar coldness behind the polite mask. Alara knew they weren't there for support. They were gathering information, but she didn't know why. Later that same day, Soren pulled her aside outside the building. He didn't yell, he smirked. "The family is worried," he said quietly. "They think you might start claiming you were mistreated. To gain sympathy." His words hit her like a slap. She couldn't believe it. All she ever wanted was distance, not pity. But clearly, they were preparing themselves for something. The next morning, she found out why. A farmer she worked with pulled her aside hesitantly and said, "Your mother told people you've been mentally unstable, that you imagine things." Alara felt the ground tilt beneath her. It all made sense now, the fake support, the questions, Soren's warning. Her parents were spreading lies to protect their reputation before she even had a chance to succeed. Despite the emotional blow, she still showed up for her grant presentation. Her hands trembled, but her voice stayed steady. When she received the email announcing she'd won the grant, tears filled her eyes. Victory tasted bittersweet, but it was hers. With the grant money, Root Signal Systems moved into small-scale manufacturing. Machines hummed, boxes stacked up, and the dream she built from scraps and sleepless nights started taking shape. That's when Vera came back, pushing harder than before. She wanted data, key designs, formulas, internal notes. Alara refused every time, and the more she resisted, the more Vera pressed. One day, Alara connected the dots. Vera wasn't acting alone. She was tied to a rival corporation. When Alara refused again, Vera's smile slipped. Her voice softened, but her words were sharp. "You won't survive long without allies, Alara." It wasn't advice. It was a threat. The news came early one morning while Alara was checking production numbers. A major farming co-op reached out, saying they wanted to place an order for 500 sensors. It was the biggest opportunity Root Signal Systems had ever received. For a moment, she let herself breathe, imagining what this could mean. Stability, growth, proof that her work mattered. But the excitement didn't last long. Within days, Alara saw a post online from the Montwells. Her parents had proudly announced that Soren had inspired the technology and that the family had been guiding her from the beginning. They acted like the entire project was a Montwell group effort. Alara's stomach twisted. She confronted them immediately, demanding they stop lying. Russ didn't even blink. "Without our name, no one will take you seriously," he said calmly, as if he was doing her a favor. That one sentence burned more than all the insults from the past. As if the emotional strain wasn't enough, things turned worse. Brenton collapsed in the workshop one afternoon. One moment he was checking a sensor's wiring, and the next he was on the floor, pale and shaking. The ambulance rushed him away, and Alara stood outside the hospital later, feeling smaller and more alone than she had in years. Brenton had been her anchor, and now she had to handle everything without him. Then the rumors started Vera's work. She began whispering to people in the industry that Alara had stolen her tech from other startups. She said Alara was unstable, reckless, and only succeeded by copying other companies' ideas. Vera's words spread fast, faster than the truth ever could. Customers who had been excited about the sensors suddenly asked for delays. Others backed out completely. The 500-unit deal paused. Sales crawled to a stop. It felt like everything she had built was falling apart. One night, while reviewing logs, Alara noticed unusual activity in her system. Someone had attempted to hack her prototype files. The attempt wasn't polished, it looked sloppy, rushed. She spent hours digging through the analytics until she found a clue. Later, when Soren called out of nowhere, pretending to check in, he slipped. He mentioned something too specific about Vera and her interest in the sensors. When Alara pressed him, he panicked and admitted it. Russ had hired Vera to keep an eye on things. Her family wasn't just sabotaging her reputation. They were attacking her work. That was the final crack. Alara blocked every number, deleted every email thread, and cut ties completely. The Montwells were no longer part of her life, not in business, not in family, not in anything. She moved into the warehouse temporarily, setting up a small camping cot in the corner. Nights were cold, uncomfortable, and lonely, but she didn't care. She worked through the dark, tightening bolts, assembling sensors, packing boxes. If she had to rebuild everything with her own 2 hands, she would. No Montwell name. No borrowed support. Just her. Alara barely slept in those days, but her determination kept her moving. One morning, she opened her email and froze. A national agriculture chain, one of the biggest in the country, wanted her to demonstrate her sensors at their annual field testing event. It was an opportunity she never imagined she'd receive, especially after all the sabotage and setbacks. She accepted immediately, heart racing with hope and fear. When she arrived at the testing grounds, rows of equipment from different companies were set up. Engineers, investors, and farmers watched closely as each device was tested in real soil conditions. Alara's hands shook a little as she installed her sensors, but once they were in the ground, her confidence returned. The readings came in fast, clean, and accurate. While other devices lagged or glitched, hers worked flawlessly. People gathered around her station, whispering and pointing, not with doubt, but with admiration. By the end of the day, she had outperformed every competitor. Her booth was the most talked about, and word spread quickly. After the demonstration, several investors approached her quietly, handing her business cards and asking if she would be open to acquisition talks. It was the first time she truly felt like the world was recognizing her hard work. But not everyone celebrated her success. Russ and Hadley showed up at her workshop 2 days later, acting warm and regretful. They spoke as if nothing had ever happened, saying they were proud and wanted to fix the family. Alara listened in silence, but she saw the panic in their eyes. They weren't there because they loved her. They were there because her success made them look bad. She told them calmly that she didn't accept apologies born from fear and walked away before they could twist her emotions again. As her name gained attention, Vera made one last desperate move. On the day Alara was scheduled to give a follow-up presentation for investors, Vera snuck into the venue early and tampered with the display files on Alara's laptop. She wanted the slides to fail in front of everyone, hoping to embarrass Alara enough to shake investor confidence. But Alara arrived earlier than expected. She entered the room and caught Vera red-handed, fingers still on the keyboard. Instead of yelling, Alara took out her phone and hit record. She calmly asked Vera what she was doing. Cornered and furious, Vera stumbled through excuses until the truth tumbled out. That short video changed everything. The rival corporation fired Vera immediately. The recording spread among industry professionals, and her reputation collapsed overnight. Alara, on the other hand, received praise for staying composed and protecting her work. Investors admired her resilience, her ability to stand strong through sabotage, family betrayal, and pressure no young founder should have to face. Within days, offers climbed into the multi-million-dollar range. And this time, Alara finally felt like the tide had turned in her favor. The acquisition papers felt heavier than they should have. Alara held the pen for a second, breathing in slowly before signing her name at the bottom of the contract. With that stroke, Root Signal Systems officially became part of a leading national AgTech company, for $9.5 million. It didn't feel real at first. All the nights in the warehouse, all the fear, all the betrayals. And now her work was valued beyond anything she'd imagined. Even better, she kept 20% ownership and was named head of innovation. Her new office overlooked acres of test fields, and a team of engineers waited for her direction. For the first time in her life, people looked to her with respect instead of dismissal. But success came with noise. The press wanted interviews. Reporters wanted the story behind the genius, and news outlets kept calling her company for comments. As soon as the Montwells saw her face on a business magazine cover, they tried to insert themselves. Hadley gave a statement claiming the family always knew Alara was extraordinary, while Russ emailed her demanding to join interviews as her support system. Her new partners advised her to keep a calm, steady image. Choose what you want the world to know, they said. Don't let anyone shape your story for you. Not even family. Their advice helped her breathe through the chaos instead of getting swept into it. But the chaos wasn't done. Soren showed up at her office without warning. He looked smaller than she remembered, nervous, twitchy, unsure of himself. He said he needed her help, that he couldn't find work, that he needed a recommendation or a connection. Please, Alara. Just one chance. She felt a familiar ache in her chest, but she stood firm. I'm not your emotional punching bag anymore, she said. Not yours. Not theirs. Soren's face fell. He didn't argue, didn't apologize. He just walked away quietly, and she let him go. After that, the truth about the Montwells' behavior spread naturally. People talked. The recording of Vera circulated. So did the stories from farmers who knew what Alara had been through. Slowly, the Montwell name lost its shine. Invitations dried up. Business partners distanced themselves. The family that once flaunted perfection now faced the consequences of their own cruelty. Alara didn't celebrate their downfall. She simply focused on what came next. With part of her earnings, she created a scholarship fund for rural students who wanted to study environmental science. She knew what it felt like to have dreams but no support, and she wanted to change that for someone else. Then she moved to a quiet lakeside town, a place with calm mornings, long sunsets, and space to start fresh. Her new home had wide windows facing the water and a small garden she planned to fill with wildflowers and herbs. One afternoon, she found a letter in her mailbox. The handwriting was unmistakable. Russ. She held the envelope between her fingers for a long moment. Then she placed it in a drawer unopened. Her new life didn't need old wounds. Alara didn't have to say a word. Her parents' downfall unfolded without her lifting a finger. The Montwell community, once dazzled by Russ and Hadley's polished public image, started hearing the truth in pieces. Whispers from former employees, neighbors who had witnessed their cruelty, and colleagues who questioned how a family so prestigious could discard their own daughter. By the time the full story circulated, business associates were already distancing themselves. Invitations dried up. Partnerships dissolved quietly. The Montwell name, once a symbol of rural prestige, became something people avoided saying aloud. Soren's decline was even sharper. Potential investors backed out, 2 regional distributors canceled meetings, and his own employees began to look for new jobs. He had built his brand on borrowed credibility, and now that the illusion was cracking, so was his confidence. Every failure traced back to the shadow he had spent years casting over Alara, a shadow she no longer stood in. Hadley, unable to handle the silence surrounding their family, marched into Alara's new corporate office demanding to speak with her. She didn't get far. Security intercepted her before she reached the elevators, escorting her back outside while she shouted accusations that fell on uninterested ears. Alara watched from behind tinted glass, not with satisfaction, but with the cool detachment of someone who had finally grown past the need to be understood. Then came the final betrayal revealed, one Alara didn't expect but recognized instantly as typical of Russ. While reviewing old documents for compliance, she found proof that Russ had lied about her mental health for years, submitting fabricated reports to shield Soren's reputation from rumors. Her supposed emotional instability had been a calculated strategy, not a misunderstanding. Her stomach turned cold, but she didn't hide the discovery. Instead, she shared the evidence with the AgTech board, choosing transparency over vengeance. The board members didn't pity her, they respected her. They praised her professionalism, her steadiness, her refusal to let personal history cloud her responsibilities. In their eyes, She became someone who had survived a storm and still walked into a room with dignity. Meanwhile, Soren spiraled. At a public farming conference, in front of cameras and reporters, he lost control, shouting at a journalist, accusing competitors of sabotage, and ultimately ranting about how everyone was turning against the Montwells. The clip went viral for all the wrong reasons. Overnight, it became clear. The Montwell legacy was collapsing under its own weight. Russ tried one last tactic, blaming Alara, calling her ungrateful, insisting she orchestrated their downfall. But no one believed him. The evidence of their cruelty, combined with their unraveling behavior, painted a picture more damning than anything Alara could have said herself. Afterward, she sat alone in her lakeside home, holding the unopened letter Russ had sent. Years of yearning for their approval washed over her, not with longing, but with grief for the time she wasted. She set the letter down, untouched, and whispered a promise to herself. She would never open it. Alara's new office buzzed with the kind of energy she had once only dreamed of, young engineers, eager graduates, and passionate innovators filling the space with ideas, sketches, and prototypes. She had personally chosen each member of her new team, prioritizing curiosity, integrity, and determination over prestige. Together, they pushed Root Signal into its next phase, refining the sensors, expanding the software, and exploring applications she once never had the resources or support to attempt. For the first time, she felt like she wasn't carrying the weight alone. As Root Signal's field expansion continued, Alara began receiving letters, real handwritten letters, from farmers across the country. Some enclosed photos of healthier crops. Others spoke about how her technology had saved them from devastating seasons. A few described being able to afford college tuition for their kids because their harvests had finally stabilized. Each letter reminded her why she had fought so hard to keep her vision alive. She kept the stack in a carved wooden box on her desk and opened it every morning before meetings, grounding herself in purpose instead of pain. One afternoon, while reviewing the newest prototype interface, she heard a cane tapping down the hallway. Brenton stepped into the doorway, smiling, healthier than she had seen him in months. His recovery had been slow and frightening at times, but seeing him stand there, upright, steady, felt like a gift. "You've surpassed every expectation I ever had," he told her, voice cracking with pride. "And I always set them high for you." The words hit her deeper than she expected. She looked around at her team, at the life she had created brick by brick, and realized she had found something she once envied in others, a true family. Not one built on obligation or blood, but on respect, encouragement, and belief. A major magazine reached out soon after, requesting a full profile of her journey. They wanted the emotional saga, the family drama, the betrayal. Alara agreed on one condition. They focused strictly on the science, the innovation, and the future of sustainable agriculture. She refused to let her success be reduced to a story about the people who tried to sink her. Her reputation grew, and with it came an invitation from investors to spearhead a new national green initiative, integrating Root Signal into environmental restoration efforts. The idea sparked something warm in her chest, a sense of alignment, of purpose finally meeting opportunity. For the first time in her life, she felt wholly fulfilled. That night, alone in her lakeside home, she opened her drawer and pulled out the letter Russ had sent. It remained sealed, untouched, full of words she no longer needed. She stepped outside, lit a match, and held the flame to the envelope. As it curled and burned, she watched the last tether to her past disappear into the quiet night. She walked back inside, lighter than ever. Russ appeared at Alara's lakeside doorstep just after sunset, his silhouette shaky under the porch light. She recognized the stance immediately. The defeated slump, the wringing hands, the desperation that always arrived only after his schemes began to crumble. He asked for one conversation, voice thin and trembling, as if the words themselves held the power to undo decades of damage. But Alara didn't open the door beyond the narrow gap the chain allowed. She kept her body angled, calm and immovable. "No," she said simply. "You're not coming in." Russ blinked rapidly, as though he hadn't prepared for refusal. "Please, Alara. Just hear me." His breath hitched, and for a moment he looked much older than she remembered. "Soren's gone, he moved out of state. And Hadley, she left for a while. I'm alone." Alara felt nothing. Once, that confession might have triggered sympathy, or at least sadness. But she'd learned long ago that her family used vulnerability as a tool, not a truth. Their collapse now was only the natural consequence of the world finally seeing who they were. She stood still, face unreadable. Russ pressed on, voice cracking. You don't understand. Everything's falling apart. Everything I tried to build. He dragged a hand over his face, then looked at her with something between panic and resignation. Elara, I need you to know something. About your college fund. Her eyes stayed steady, but inside, a single thread tightened. I sabotaged it, he said. I used the money. I didn't want, he swallowed painfully. I didn't want 2 children succeeding at once. Soren needed the advantage. You were always stubborn. You'd be fine. For a moment, the world went very still. It wasn't surprising, not really. It only confirmed what she had already learned through years of fragmented memories and unexplained struggles. But hearing it spoken plainly in his own voice exposed the rot that had always lived beneath the surface. She inhaled slowly. I don't need anything from you, Russ. Not money. Not excuses. Not even the truth. His face crumpled. Then what about forgiveness? No, she said, her tone firm but quiet. That's not yours to have. Russ's shoulders sagged, not in feigned defeat this time, but in genuine, irreversible collapse. He turned away from the house, each step heavy, his figure growing smaller against the dim path that led back to the road. For the first time in her life, he looked powerless, utterly stripped of the authority he once wielded so casually. Elara didn't stay to watch him leave. She shut the door with a calm, steady motion, the latch clicking into place like the final punctuation on a chapter long overdue to end. As she stood in the quiet of her home, an unexpected stillness settled over her. Not relief. Not triumph. Just peace, quiet, expansive, and earned. A year had passed since root signal systems became a recognized name in sustainable agriculture, and Elara's sensors were now standard across multiple states. Farmers relied on them to monitor soil conditions, predict crop yields, and prevent losses. Every field she visited reminded her of how far she had come, from nights in a cramped studio to shaping an innovation that was genuinely changing lives. She decided to host a community event at one of the larger farms she had partnered with. It was a celebration of progress, farmers sharing success stories, children learning about soil and crops, and neighbors gathering to honor sustainable practices. Elara walked among them quietly, absorbing the smiles, the gratitude, and the sense of shared accomplishment. She spoke briefly to the crowd, explaining how the technology worked, the principles behind it, and the importance of nurturing the earth. At the end of the event, Brenton approached her, leaning on his cane with a proud smile. The mentorship is officially yours now, he said, pressing a hand on her shoulder. You've taken everything I've taught you and created something far bigger than I imagined. This is your moment, Elara. She nodded, feeling a sense of responsibility and freedom mingling together. She realized she wasn't just carrying on his work. She was leading it, shaping it, and building a legacy of her own. When it was her turn to speak, she didn't tell the usual motivational cliches. Instead, she shared a simple truth about perseverance, self-worth, and the families we choose to surround ourselves with. She spoke of collaboration, integrity, and believing in oneself even when the world doubted you. Her words were genuine, resonating with the farmers and engineers who had watched her journey unfold. The Montwells were absent, as they always had been. She never reached out to them, and their attempts to contact her had long since been ignored. Soren tried to message her once more, claiming he wanted guidance, but she blocked him without hesitation. She had no room in her life for people who had never truly supported her. Meanwhile, Elara focused on expanding Root Signal's impact beyond her home state. International partnerships were forming, and global agricultural initiatives began incorporating her technology. She invested in research, development, and education programs for young engineers and environmental scientists. In a quiet decision, she purchased land by a small lake, envisioning her own research farm. Here, she could experiment freely, test new technologies, and create a sustainable model for future generations. It was her sanctuary, a place where her vision could grow uninterrupted. Her life had transformed completely, quiet, chosen, and her own. The noise of past betrayals, broken promises, and family pressures had been replaced with purpose, peace, and achievement. Elara often looked back, remembering the little girl her parents had dismissed as the disappointment daughter. But now, she wasn't living in their shadow. She had created her own legacy, one built on determination, innovation, and the belief that her worth was never defined by anyone else. The girl who was once underestimated had finally become unstoppable. Do you think Alara made the right choice by cutting ties with her family and focusing on her own path? Or should she have tried to mend things? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'm really curious to hear your perspective. And if you love stories like this, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new one.